Hi, welcome. I'm Diane Sharp, Director of Admissions for the Wharton MBA program in Philadelphia. With me today are Peter Capelli. Peter is the professor, the George W. Taylor Professor of Management, and he's the Director of the Center for Human Resources. And also with me is Adam Dubberly. Adam is a current second-year student in the Executive MBA program, and he's Vice President and Relationship Manager at Glenmead Trust. Today's webinar topic is negotiating sponsorship. Professor Capelli teaches a very popular negotiations course in our electives year, and he's going to share with you some strategy suggestions on how to get the buy-in from your employer. And then Adam will share with him his experience as he rallied his colleagues to allow him to participate in the program. And then I'm happy to share how sponsorship impacts your admissions to the program. So along the way, if you would please post your questions on the interface in front of you, and those questions will be posed to everyone on camera here today. All right, so if we would start with Professor Capelli, if you wouldn't mind sharing how you suggest anyone applying to the Executive MBA program gets sponsored.
Well, you know, over time, the norms on this have changed a lot, and employers have gotten, frankly, more resistant to paying, and when they pay, they don't pay quite as much. So I think we have to make the case to them as to why they should do it. It's probably always a good thing to do that, even if your employer's already got a policy that they're going to pay for part of it or all of it anyway. You might want to make the case. And I think the way you start to make that case is to first figure out who is the person you have to make the case to. And that is, who is the person who actually has the authority to make the decision, and that's not always obvious. And it's often not your immediate supervisor, which doesn't mean that you cut your immediate supervisor out, but it does mean that you have to think about what kind of arguments are going to be persuasive and who has to hear them. So, you know, a typical story here might be that you're trying to manage up, right? This is managing your bosses, and that means that you're trying to put your request in terms of what you think their interests are. So why would this help the company for me to go to the program? And you know, there are lots of possible explanations that would work for that, but I think a couple of them that are pretty common. One has to do with your own growth and development, and that you become a more effective manager or executive in the organization afterwards as part of leadership development. That's a powerful argument, but it's got to be made to the right people, and often it's not your immediate supervisor who cares about that. And the reason is because in the future, there's a pretty good chance if you grow and develop, you will leave your immediate supervisor. And if that's the case, and it often is, that your immediate supervisor's paying for it, but they actually, or would have to pay for it, but they don't really have any interest in you outgrowing your current job, you got to figure out who does have that interest, and it might very well be somebody in corporate. You can kind of make that pitch to them, and you're kind of hoping that those folks will kind of override what your supervisor's interest is, which is maybe not to see you go in the first place. So one of the issues is to say, I become more effective for the organization as a more effective leader. The other might be to persuade them that in your current job, you can be more effective, and it helps there to be pretty practical and to be able to show them some things that you think the organization needs in marketing or finance or something else that maybe the current boss is not completely aware of, but you think you might be aware of after the program or during the program, right? So that's another thing you might do. And then there are fairness questions. If you can think, for example, about why it makes sense to give you this opportunity because of what the organization has done before or what it's done for other people, being able to make the case that other companies have done the same thing, peer companies are paying for this, that's a final argument to make. I think the riskiest argument to make, but it's often powerful, and you hear this, frankly, much more on the West Coast than on the East Coast, is about retention. And you have to be a little careful how you make that argument. On the West Coast, I think they're more sympathetic to it. I think on the East Coast, they get kind of nervous and irritated if you kind of begin to hint that maybe you're not locked into that organization for the rest of your career. But to be able to tell them why this is likely to keep you in the company, and a simple explanation is that, for the next 2 years, I'm obviously here because I'm in the program, And after that, it gives me more opportunities internally, or, you have to figure out a story about a career path internally that makes the case that if you go to the program, you're more likely to stay here longer term. And maybe there are subtle ways to kind of hint a little bit that people are not staying in these organizations very long. And I think, again, on the West Coast, they're less likely to be offended about that than the East Coast. You have to dance a little carefully on the East Coast to do that. And finally, a couple of other things. It might be useful to think in the context where you've got to make the case, whether it's better for you to do it or other people to do it for you. It helps to have allies in the organization, and if there are people above you or maybe lateral to you even, peers, who could help advance your position and your argument, sometimes it's good to have them make the case for you rather than you make it directly, or at the very least maybe they support the case a little bit after you've made it. So you got to think this out as a plan, a kind of strategy. Who is the person you got to make the case to? What kind of case is going to work for them? Who else could help you make it? Lay that all out before you do it. Preparation matters a lot here.
Great. Thanks, Professor Capelli. And Adam, if you would, share where you work, what you do, and how you strategize.
Sure. So I think a lot of what Professor Capelli rings true for my situation. I am a portfolio manager here at a Philadelphia-based wealth management firm, the Glenmead Trust Company. My personal experience was such that I was at a point in my career where I knew that the Wharton program was the right program for me, not simply because I call Philadelphia home, but also because I generally believe that it is the best executive MBA program out there. That being said, I work for a 300-member organization, which brings with it its own challenges associated with soliciting sponsorship. And frankly, soliciting the maximum amount of sponsorship that I could. So I engaged early and often many members of our senior management committee. Having direct access to them is a luxury that I realize not everyone is going to have. But I found in particular the folks that had either been through an MBA program part-time or also full-time, those were the folks that were really sort of sensitive to my situation and wanted to do everything that they could to be supportive and help me through the actual obtainment of sponsorship. And so there is a popular line that's uttered by one of our entrepreneurship professors, Bob Borghese, says regularly, if you're working towards something, one of the things that you can do to sort of improve your odds are to consistently make sure that you're not eating alone. Have lunch with people as often as you can and really engage them in a dialogue to ask for their support and ask them to help further your cause. So I did that, and I took a good 6 months to work through all of the folks on our senior management and other places inside the organization that could help me get the sponsorship that I was after. Ultimately, I was successful, but it took time, and I think this isn't something that is necessarily going to come quickly and easily. As Professor Capelli said, you really need to make sure that you're working through all of the things that this will mean for your organizations as well. This is a two-way proposition, and I think retention is certainly big. I'm an East Coaster, but I can attest to the fact that my company very much liked the idea of being able to wrap me up and keep me in the fold for several more years. And ultimately, as I said, it was a successful proposition, but it was not one that came easy. So know that you're going to have to work for this and build your support as you go. And I think ultimately you'll get good direction from the folks that want to see you succeed and do well.
I think it's a great point to find those people who've been to programs like this before, and especially find those people who've been to Wharton before.
Yeah.
And they're both likely to support you. Right?
Yeah, because in many ways, the support is not simply the financial aspect, which we all worry about every day. I can tell you that every other Friday out of the office is a big commitment. And so anyone that's been through a part-time MBA program knows that that time element of the sponsorship is critical. So, in my case, having those folks advocate for me not simply on the financial aspects of the decision, but also working through providing some continuity in the moments when I'm not in the office, that's been wildly effective and positive for me.
I'm sure you have classmates who are under different scenarios, not fully sponsored. Some just have the time. Have you guys shared the different types of sponsorship you are here with?
Yeah, absolutely. So certainly it's a blessing to have an organization come to you and say, we want to fully sponsor you for this. But on my small learning team alone, we run the gamut with respect to varying levels of sponsorship. It is a big financial commitment for the individuals that get no sponsorship, but I think very quickly and early on in the process you realize that having that day out of the office and the time in between that's necessary to sort of meet all of our obligations academically, it is a tremendous commitment for the organization in any respect. So I can tell you that every one of my small learning team members actively sought sponsorship from their organizations, obviously with varying levels of success. But, at the end, I don't think there's a single one of us that look back and regret the decision that we made, whether to take that financial burden on ourselves or to make commitments to our organizations for a period of years. We all look back and while it's winding down now, we recognize that this is one of the most tremendous opportunities we could have put in front of ourselves.
Yeah, to add on to what Adam said, from the admissions committee perspective, in the East Coast and the West Coast, we see several hundred applications a year, and probably 90% of them are different and unique as far as sponsorship goes. Very few people come from companies that have a standardized program, and we know what's going on with that program. Everyone has pretty much worked out what they're going to do, and what you work out with your company as far as how long you need to stay, if you need to pay some of it back after leaving, that's between you and your company. We just need a letter from your company that says, we're comfortable with the calendar. We'll make sure that he or she is there in San Francisco or Philadelphia every other Friday, and here's what we're doing, whether it's time only or 100% or somewhere in between. We've seen it all, and we will be happy to have that conversation with you. I think you mentioned that. Go ahead. Yeah.
The other thing I think I've noticed about our students over time is the negotiation often continues, right? So that you have a deal, you get permission to go, you get some sort of financial support, and the negotiations often continue. And I'd say most people probably end up slightly better off than when they start the process. That is, they're able to negotiate for more support or more time off or something, like that. And I think partly that's because they figure out how to leverage their experience at Wharton, to be able to make arguments as to why I'm contributing in ways that are important to you. And also, I think whenever there are retention issues that start to come up, the companies get a little more interested in paying more as a way to keep you. And my guess is that's the way things are looking. It's even if you don't get a great deal right now from your employer, that doesn't mean you won't a year from now in terms of getting more support because the labor market's picking up.
Yeah, to your point, Professor, my experience afforded me the opportunity to sort of take a stretch assignment right after my time at Wharton began, and I was able to take some of the lessons learned back to the office and translate those to early wins for our company. I know a number of my classmates have been able to do the same, and in several instances, folks have had success in sort of renegotiating levels of commitment upon entry and beginning the program. One other thing that I would advocate for anyone after they successfully join the program, there is a sponsors day that happens early in the entrance of the program. That is a phenomenal opportunity to bring your employer in and just see all of the wonderful things that you're doing. And I know my employer, my sponsor, went back to our office and thought long and hard about whether or not this program might be right for her. So it's a great thing to do.
And especially those employers who are cheap will show up and see all these other employers and discover that maybe they're on the cheap side, and that has some influence as well.
Absolutely.
Make sure you can figure out who they should sit with.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, we've actually had applicants visit us. We encourage everyone to come and interview before you submit your application, and they'll attend a class, have lunch with students, and they will go away at the end of their visit day already with some knowledge that they can take back to their employer to really secure that sponsorship. Good. So I'm going to go to some of the questions that we have online. Please keep putting them up there. All right, Madhu asks, do you have any specific recommendations for physicians who work for hospital corporations? How best would she make the case to clinical bosses and their administrative bosses?
Well, I think it might be a harder sell with the clinical bosses, and I think it raises an interesting point to remember that not everyone in your organizations is necessarily looking after your interests, right? And not everybody necessarily wants you to go to these programs. And I think for the people who are the least likely to be supportive are the people who are most concerned about your performance in your current job, and they want you to keep doing that current job well. And also there are people who are threatened by the idea that you're going to go away and come back with a different set of skills than they've got, and a set of skills that they don't quite understand. So you can sort of figure that out and probably get a sense of it from people. And if you don't have a good sense, you might ask your peers what they think the boss thinks about your proposal. And then it's probably time to go around them, to have conversations with the people above them. And in this case, if they're administrative people above, they're more likely to be sympathetic. And so, maybe you need to make the case to them as well. It probably is worth pointing out, though, that we have an awful lot of doctors come through the program. And that's something that you could point out to them. And I think even for the clinical bosses, I think you can tell them the importance of having people who understand the administrative issues on the medical side, and vice versa. The importance of having people in business leadership who understand the medical side. So, you can try to persuade them why this is in the interests of the organization, why it might be in the interest of them, your supervisor as well, to have somebody in the business side, or somebody who knows medicine, or somebody who's going to stay on the medical side who understands what the administrators are doing. But you have to recognize too sometimes that they're just not going to buy it, and you got to figure out who to go around.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing we really try to do is when you connect with us in the application process is to connect you with a current student who is in a similar position. So we would try to connect you with a physician to help give you that shared perspective. Definitely. Right, from Patty, she says, hello, I'm looking for suggestions on how to have the conversation with a new employer. I started less than a month ago. Grad school was discussed in the interview, but I didn't specify starting in 2015.
Ooh.
Yeah, I think that's a difficult one. I will admit that in my new role, I have a couple of employees who are new to the organization that are coming to me as their manager now and asking about their opportunities to do the same. I think if the conversation was had early throughout the interview process, I think there is a propensity or a willingness to support you through that type of sponsorship. I think it's important to be amenable to different ways that you might be able to obtain that sponsorship. So it might be something that ramps up over time so that they can affirm that you are the top performer that they thought you were when they hired you. And I think you just have to be accepting of the fact that it might not be a full commitment right out of the gates, but it's something that you could potentially work to over time.
I think it was a smart idea to talk to him about it at the interview time, because it's a difficult thing to come into an organization and start asking for stuff. It's one thing to ask for things before you come in, and then they sort of know what they're buying. But if you come in and then ask, it's kind of a tough sell. So I would be careful about that. I guess I would see if I could find allies or colleagues or somebody that you could talk to frankly about it to get a sense of whether this is going to really backfire. If it's going to backfire, you might want to think about putting it off for a year or two. I mean, there are, worse things than not going for a year or so. And one of the worst things would be to irritate your bosses and not get to go anyway. If it's a place that you're going to be for a while, I would feel that out, but I would keep in mind the possibility that maybe it just doesn't make sense to try to go in your first year or so back.
And it's a lot to take on, a new job and this program. We've seen it happen, of course, but that's a big undertaking to do both. And Wharton will be here in the next few years too. So, all right, Dave asks, how do you recommend leveraging employer sponsorship as part of the job interview as you are looking at prospective employers?
So this, make sure I understand this. So this would be, I'm applying for a job and I want to talk to them about the program as part of my applying for the job.
You get me and me going to Wharton at the same time.
And this would be for somebody who's not currently going here?
Exactly.
Story,
Yeah.
So how to do it up front. Well, I think it's not unlike what you would try to do inside your own organization. You're trying to sell it to them. The difficulty here is you don't necessarily have anybody else in the company that can support you. You can't do what Adam was doing, and that is figure out who's already got a Wharton MBA, figure out who's gone part-time, get those folks to support you. So to be able to do it on the front end is harder like that when you're coming in the door. I guess it does have the advantage of being more contractual if they say yes, and particularly if you're at a point in the organization where you actually get an offer letter that specifies these things, that it's kind of easier to do, execute down the line, but you have to make the case to them. And the case is partly why this is not such a big deal. I can do this and go to school, which is a little tricky, but you have to be able to make that case. And you have to tell them why this is going to be worth it for the organization. It's just a lot harder to do. You don't know the organization as well. It's harder to make the case. And it's a little less credible to say that I can, make this happen, because you can't really say that what your job is going to be like once you get there. So it's a little harder on the way in. And again, you might want to think about how important that is to do to try to nail this down before you start your job, if this is really a deal breaker for you or not, right? If it's not a deal breaker, you might want to think about how hard you want to push for it when you're coming in the door. And I would say not that hard, frankly, because it could be a deal breaker on their side, because it's such a big thing to ask for when you're coming in.
Yeah, the one thing I would add, Professor, is that most major employers today have policies around the way that they go about making these sorts of sponsorship commitments. And I think inside my own organization, one of the things that I've seen to be most successful is, particularly if it's somebody that's new coming into the organization, make sure you're being creative about what you're offering back to them. This is definitely a two-way street. And so while the policy might dictate something on the order of, a term of employment before you actually obtain any kind of sponsorship, be willing to be creative. If they're willing to sponsor you through something like the WEMBA program and hire you at the same time, they obviously think a lot of you as an employee. So maybe offer them something in terms of a longer commitment on the back end to solicit that sponsorship.
I think I would be a little careful about the policies, though, because most companies, I think all companies, have policies on tuition reimbursement. But what happens with WEMBA is often quite different than that, right? Because the tuition reimbursement programs are pretty low level. They don't pay much. They're pretty stingy. And you're asking for something different here, which tends to be negotiated. But I would ask them what the policies are, and I would ask them what other people have done on the front end when you're being hired. The problem is they may not know. I mean, they'll know the policies, but they probably don't have a good sense about what is typical in the organization. And in fact, in many big organizations, no one knows that, really, because it's often a series of idiosyncratic deals place by place by place, and it's never aggregated up so anybody has a sense of what's really happening there.
Yeah, very much so. We might have 3 different students from the same organization with 3 completely different scenarios that they've worked out.
Which reminds you how important your immediate boss is and who's making the actual decision, right? Mm-hmm. And it tends to be much lower down these days than a generation ago where it was all kind of centralized.
Mm-hmm. And Sunny asks, do most sponsoring companies give their student employees time to study in addition to the other type of support? And we have seen that. Sometimes sometimes it's in their letters. We will say we'll give this person every other Friday and a certain number of hours a week, but whether that comes to fruition, not sure.
Yeah, I know in my experience that wasn't something that I thought about negotiating. It might be appropriate for you depending upon how your everyday workflow goes. I know that in retrospect it would have been nice to have that, but certainly I think that's probably tertiary on the list of things that would come to mind. So we all, as students, tend to, whether it's late into the evenings or on our off weekends, we find a way to sort of get what we need to done. But
although I think it is a good point to think about once you start the program. And honestly, I think the people who have real trouble in the program are people who take on really big challenges at work at the same time they're trying to do this. And that's something to keep in mind as you're thinking about this process. You really shouldn't do that. You know, it's a big, big risk that you won't be able to do either one very well. And you probably ought to think about, you know, you are putting your career forward while you're here at doing WEMBA, but you can't put your, you know, your job hunting, your deal cutting, your career progression on a fast track at the same time that you're doing WEMBA, because it's, you know, the risks are really big that you'll fail at both of them.
And Janet asks, you mentioned in one of the arguments that you can become a more effective employee by doing this program if they support you. Are there any examples? Is it difficult to know how we will it is difficult, to know how we will improve our organization after getting an MBA before we go through the courses. Anything tangible that you've heard?
Yeah, I have a couple examples. So in my own case, as I said, I was taking a new assignment. We were going through the process of segmenting our business to really make sure we were delivering service appropriately to our clients. And I was able to bring some marketing knowledge on the segmentation process, the right way to do that, that I learned early in the program. And frankly, you know, that segmentation analysis and working through that was not something I had ever been exposed to previously. In addition to that, one of my small learning team members was working on a large transaction for a financial services organization that was trying to value their options as it related to the decisions that they had to make. So he engaged in an elective course that was specifically centered around real option pricing. And he built a real option matrix that was pretty profound that ultimately found its way to the senior member of a multi-thousand person organization. So I think the opportunities will find themselves, you know, they'll find their way to you, and you just have to make sure that you find the time to take advantage of them and bring them back to the organization.
I think the question asks a hard thing, and that is, how can you do that even before you start the program? And here's what I would do. I'd think about my own organization, and I would think about the biggest memorable screw-up that happened, or something where your immediate boss and your part of the organization felt blindsided by something. You know, if you're in healthcare, for example, and you're the clinical folks, and a new accounting system was put in place that really ended up messing things up for you. And you can talk to your boss and say, you know, it would have been great if we had known how these accounting systems worked before they were dropped on us. And that's the kind of stuff I'm going to be learning here. So I would make it very tangible. I wouldn't be abstract about any of these things. I'd be very concrete and think of particular problems that you've seen already, or maybe you're seeing right then in your organization, where the boss, and maybe you as well, don't really know much about this. You know, we're trying to figure out why this, they're asking us to change our strategy based on this marketing research. That's what they're telling us. But we have no idea whether this research is any good or not. And it would be really important if we could say, but we can't right now because nobody knows about how this stuff works, but that's what I'd be learning, right? So I'd make it tangible now.
Yeah, and our next question from Lauren is actually answered somewhat by what both of you just said, but feel free to add on. She says, I work for a large financial services firm, and the policy regarding sponsorship for executive MBAs is that it's up to the discretion of your leader to sponsor employees up to the full amount. What are some best practices for pitching the idea of financial sponsorship to my leader, given it comes out of his budget directly and we're often tight on money?
I think one of the ways to do it is to tell them what everybody else is doing. And you know, our offices can help you with that. Here are the companies that are sponsoring people. Here's the kind of sponsorship people are doing. That's, you know, they care a lot about that, typically the senior levels of the organization. You know, making the case why this is useful to your boss. We described some of the ways you might think about why it's going to pay off for them. So I'd say it's, it's sort of the things we've more or less already talked about. I don't know if there's anything particular in financial services, but I think financial services, maybe they're a little more sensitive to retention issues because people hop around so much, and being able to play that card a little stronger might be easier there than someplace else, but you might have a feel for what's happening there now.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally, I know inside my own organization, we have a lot of folks that are technically proficient at their task. What we seem to have been missing was a little bit more of the leadership and how to motivate and attract talent, and also to sort of manage them. And so one of the propositions that I made to my manager when I was trying to get him to buy into this was, you're asking me to take on 20 employees. I've never managed people before. And the early lessons in leadership that I'll learn at Wharton will really help not only this group, but also more broadly as I endeavor to hopefully grow within the organization.
There's something else you might think about doing. It reminded me of a colleague at another university who left an offer letter from another school on his desk for about 3 months, right? He just had it sitting there. And what you might do is find those articles that are appearing in Businessweek or Forbes about financial service companies that are developing new programs on leadership, and just leave them strategically open on your desk. Goldman's is doing this, or Morgan Stanley's doing that, and just leave them around. And maybe that's part of your overall marketing campaign to try to persuade people to take this seriously.
All right, and Gleb asks, what are the typical retention requirements that come with 100% sponsorship? Is 2-year commitment fair? As far as the committee's concerned, we don't see requirements anymore. There might be in some companies, but that's a company-based decision.
When you say you don't see requirements, that means?
By the company saying you have to stay 2 years after or 3 years after.
Oh.
Again, that's done between the employee and the company.
Oh, you mean
we don't see it?
Yeah.
So we wouldn't be able to tell you what's
Right.
typical.
Right. But you must have a sense of your colleagues. What are they looking like?
I do.
Yeah.
I can tell you 2 years is very reasonable. That's the commitment that I have to my organization. Frankly, I don't even think I'll wind up thinking about that. It'll go by, as this 2 years has, quite fast. But I've heard anything on the order of 2 to 4 years. That's generally the band that I've heard from my colleagues.
I think when you're talking about that with your employer, one of the things you want to think about is commitment. What does that commitment actually mean? And for folks who believe that commitment means that you have to go back to your previous desk and stay there for 2 years, that's pretty onerous. If it means you've got to stay inside the company someplace, but they're not going to keep you in your current job, that's not so onerous. Because for most people, the reason you're coming to the program is you want to do something different after you graduate. And if it means you got to go back to your chair and, do the same work that you were doing for 2 years, that's a pain. I'd say, though, I wouldn't worry too much about these, to be honest, because they don't seem to hold people anyway. That is, if somebody wants to leave, the other employers seem perfectly happy to buy them out. So they don't seem to be such a big constraint, so maybe they're not. I'd pay more attention to the signals about what they want you to do after you finish the program, or what the expectations are, than I would to the contract per se, if it's a sort of standard 2-year thing.
Good. The next question from Imad, I'm going to answer quite quickly, actually. He asks if it's recommended that applicants proceed with negotiations before an admissions decision is made, or wait until the decision is made to further the negotiations. We do need to see a letter of sponsorship in your application. You're not going to get a decision unless we know your company is backing you. Again, that can change over the course of the 2 years that you're in the program. If you get the time initially, that's great. One caveat is we have what's called fellows applicants. Those are individuals who on paper might look like they'd be a better fit for the Wharton full-time MBA program, the less experienced individuals. And then your company would need to invest in you to say that this is part of your development within the company. Otherwise, we don't have that requirement for financial sponsorship. But we do need their buy-in. We can't give you a decision unless we have that letter sign-off.
Yeah, and that makes sense because you don't want to admit people, and once you admit anybody here, that means there's a bunch of people who are not getting in, and you don't want to hold positions for people who might not be able to take them. Right?
Exactly.
So.
Yeah, and they should be part of the process, that application as much as possible. They are going to be benefiting from you attending. So as I mentioned, we see every sort of creative negotiation done, and what goes on behind is not as important as the fact that they give you that bandwidth to do at the time. All right. Ramez asks, my current manager is moving to a new internal role, and my new manager has yet to be hired. Should I wait until the new boss is hired before broaching the time money sponsorship issue, or try to obtain commitment from my current manager? So his instinct says to start with the current manager.
Oh, sounds right.
Yeah, yeah.
Cut the deal with the person who doesn't have to bear the costs, you know? They're more likely to give you a very nice deal, and partly because they know you already, right? So I'd say for sure you want to do it with that person you already know.
Yeah, Ramez, I had the same experience where I was changing managers at the time that I was soliciting sponsorship. I can tell you that I actively engaged both of them. And throughout the program, I found that that old manager still stays in touch and makes sure that I'm getting the support that I need throughout the organization to make it work. So it's not a bad idea also to make sure that you're soliciting buy-in from everyone who can help you along the way.
And it also, as I was mentioning, that it does matter how big the organization is. If you're in a pretty small one, you know, you got to talk to everybody, right? But if this is Pepsi or GM or something, you may never see your old boss again. So you better grab him first or her first, and the new boss coming in, maybe somebody that, there'll be no contact with afterwards. So, a deal is a deal. If that's the story, then do it with the person who's going to give you the best deal.
We have a question from Sunny, and she's asking me actually directly. I did a master's degree as a full-time student. How do I determine if I have enough work experience to apply as a traditional applicant versus a fellows applicant? I alluded to that earlier. There is that distinction we make, and the best way to know how you should apply is to contact us. You would contact me or Kathy Maloney here in Philadelphia, or Kathy Lilligren, who's the Director of Admissions for the San Francisco office, because it's not as if it's a cut and dry number of years of experience. It comes in all shapes and forms. So we want to have that discussion, and I think Adam had gone through that process as he was applying too, to have a full understanding so all parties are involved are on board, the school, the applicant, and the company. So we're more than happy to have that type of conversation with you along the way. All right, now we have a question from Judy. I've had a conversation with my boss about pursuing an MBA, and I'm in the position of having to go around her. At which point do I loop her in?
Well, I guess it depends on how the conversations are going with the folks around her. So I would say, I would tell the folks around her what's happening. That you don't think there's much support from your current boss. But you think this is maybe a corporate issue or a department issue, and that you're thinking about a career in the organization that is broader than just in your current job. So, there's an interest in this. I think if it's any kind of sensible people you're talking to, they're probably already talking to your boss about this. So I wouldn't try to hide it from your boss. But you don't necessarily have to tell your boss everything. So I think you're probably safe if you say, I did want to see what people at corporate thought about these policies and what the opportunities were. You can say that. You don't have to tell them everybody you're talking to and what you're saying to them and what they're saying back to you. But I wouldn't keep them out of the loop, but there's a question of how small the loop has to be. I think you got some leeway there.
From Sundar, when I speak to my manager, I can certainly talk about values I will bring to our team, but I also think I can use the MBA on other areas outside of my department. How should I approach such a topic? My concern is it may be perceived by my manager negatively that I'm using their help to jump sides within the organization.
Yeah, well, that's a problem. And I think the problem is addressed on your part by figuring out who the decision makers are going to be. And if your immediate boss is the person who's got complete discretion over this, and she's the person who makes the call, then you got to make the case to her as to why this is useful inside your own unit. And the fact that it might be useful someplace else is not going to matter much. And if your boss really makes the call, then talking to other people in the organization about how in the long term this is useful for you and the company doesn't matter very much. On the other hand, if you think it does matter, if you think that the people above your boss have some influence over this, then you need to make the case to them as well. I suppose even if you think that informally people in other parts of the organization might lobby on your behalf, maybe you want to make the case to them as well. But for your immediate boss, you got to state it in terms of how this is going to help the boss in the boss's current role and what you're going to be able to contribute in your current job if you were more skilled and knew more broadly. And I think, again, the best way to do that is to point out the concrete examples in your own organization where things have not gone right or where you felt blindsided and where additional knowledge would have been useful to your unit and to your immediate boss in order to figure out what was coming at them from someplace else.
Great. We're already at 1:10, so I've got 2 more questions, and those are going to have to be the last ones. We're going to be wrapping it up here pretty quickly. First one, I'm part of a large organization with 200,000 employees, and my boss and his boss are interested to know how financially I can help in the organization's growth specific to their department. Any suggestions?
So the problem is they want to grow. It's in your department, so this has got to be P&L. Somebody's got responsibility for operations broadly. I think that's a situation where an MBA is particularly useful because lots of things play into growth. Some of it's marketing, figuring out opportunities. Some of it is on the cost side. Some of it is on the resource side. Some of it's strategy side. So being able to lay out what the MBA experience is like for a boss who doesn't have one or doesn't have business background is important. And to be able to tell them these are the kinds of things that they're teaching there is figuring out where markets are, figuring out how to go after them, figuring out what our capabilities are, looking at our resources, understanding execution issues, and maybe just draw them a little map, get it from somebody else who's already got it. What do we know about growth? And lay out the different parts and say, here's what people are saying about how companies grow. Here's what the MBA program offers me. Tick this box, this one, this one, this one, this one. And that's why it makes sense to do this program.
And our last question comes from Philip, who is in Toronto, which I do want to actually emphasize. Part of what you're going to be exposed to here and bringing back to the office is a very global immediate network. So I think that could be part of the argument for some of you.
And it's also warmer here than it is in Toronto.
We do have people flying in from Florida as well every other week. Yes. So Philip asks, I live and work in Toronto. Do you have any specific examples that I could leverage to my financial services employer here about leveraging the U.S. market?
Ooh. Yeah, that's a good one. We actually, my class has a Canadian-based financial services employee, and I know that she's been tremendously successful in taking, particularly some of the, finance has no boundaries. So I think her organization has felt that she's been able to bring back a lot to really help sort of focus how they want to do business inside the U.S. and more broadly. Beyond that, I can't say that anything really specific comes to mind. Professor, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd say you be a little careful how you pitch this. So this way sounds very positive, to say, I'm going to learn what people at Morgan are doing and Goldman and the other companies in the U.S. Telling them I'm going to make social connections with people from Morgan, from Goldman, from the other places, sounds a little threatening to your current employer, right? That they're thinking, oh, you're going to meet all these people and you're going to leave us because you'll have these ties. So the spin you make on it in that case matters probably a lot.
Good, and that actually reminds me that we do have career services managers, one in San Francisco and one in Philadelphia, who help all of our students. The level of help each student gets is dependent upon how much sponsorship. So if your company is going to significantly invest in you, we're not going to actively put you in front of recruiters. You can use that also to reassure you, yes, you'll be more marketable, but Wharton is not going to actively put you in front of recruiters. Everyone who comes through the program gets career development tools, whether it's in the company, just interviewing how to leverage, optimize your career. But there's a distinction made depending on if your company is fully backing you. All right, well, this has been really interesting, and I want to thank Professor Peter Capelli and Adam Dubberly for joining me here today. And we have been recording this. We're going to put it on our website, and we'll send it to you. And we are getting some more webinars up for the new year. This will be our last one of 2014, so hopefully you've gotten the message that if you have any further questions, please contact us here in Philadelphia or San Francisco so we can help flesh all your questions about sponsorship and other aspects of the admissions process and the program out. Thanks very much.